Dark Control, AI, and Humanity's End by Michael J.
All
McCarran.
right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about the ultimate backdoor. And no, not into a computer. I mean, into the human mind itself. We're going to explore this wild technology that could link our brains directly to machines, and then ask the big question, what happens when that connection gets hacked? And just look at this. We're moving way beyond the kind of stuff you might be imagining, all the familiar wires and electrodes. We are heading into a seriously strange new frontier, one that's based in the weird world of quantum physics. So let's just pose the central question right up front. What if you could link your mind to a machine without a single wire? And think about it. This isn't just about, typing faster or having some cool new video game controller. No. This is about completely rewriting the rules of how we create, how we communicate, maybe even how we think. Okay, so that brings us to the tech itself, brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs for short. And look, the whole point here isn't just to make a better mouse or a fancier keyboard. The real goal is to make the interface itself completely disappear. I mean, just think about it for a second. Right now, to get any idea from your head onto a screen, you have to do this clunky translation, right? You translate a thought into muscle movements, your fingers typing, you're clicking a mouse, you're swiping a screen. BCIs? Well, they're designed to just collapse that entire layer, to create a direct, unfiltered pathway from your neural activity straight to a digital command. So this is basically where we're at today. You can see the whole landscape here. On one end, you've got the really invasive stuff. We're talking actual surgery. And on the other end, you have non-invasive tech, like those EEG caps that just read signals from your scalp. The thing is, the closer you get to the neurons themselves, the cleaner the signal is. But of course, the risk goes way up. It's this constant, delicate trade-off between getting really precise data and, being safe. But here's the thing. Just reading those signals, that's only half the story. The real game changer, the absolute revolution, happens when you throw artificial intelligence into the mix, because that's what transforms a BCI from just a simple controller into something way more powerful, a true cognitive partner. And this leads to this absolutely fascinating concept called human AI co-adaptation. Now, this is not a one-way street where the AI is just passively decoding your thoughts. Not at all. It's more like a dance. The AI starts to learn the unique rhythm of your brain, and at the same time, your brain learns the steps that the AI understands best. They literally start to evolve together. In this diagram right here, this shows that dance in action. You can clearly see that feedback loop. The AI is constantly adapting to the human brain, but, and this is the crazy part, the human brain, our own cognition, is adapting right back to the AI. It's this non-stop process of mutual fine-tuning, creating this hybrid system that's way more than the sum of its parts. Okay, so if we're creating this incredibly intimate, deeply integrated system, what happens when somebody else wants in? This is the moment where the whole conversation shifts from pure possibility to some pretty serious peril. And this is where we enter the brand new and kind of terrifying domain of neurosecurity. And I really want you to let this next part sink in. We're not talking about someone stealing your password anymore or getting your credit card number. We are talking about security breaches that can fundamentally alter who a person is, their memories, their decisions, their entire sense of self. So the threats here, as you can see, are just on a whole other level. I mean, look at this. You have attacks like neural data exfiltration, that's literally stealing thoughts, or even more subtle, model poisoning, where an attacker could slowly, quietly corrupt the AI to influence your behavior over time, and you would never, ever realize it. And from there, it gets even more direct, and frankly, more brutal. Unauthorized neurostimulation could be used to literally cause pain, or confusion, or create compulsive behaviors. And something called cognitive conditioning could gradually shape what you like and what you decide, all through this constant subconscious feedback loop that you're not even aware of. So here's the bottom line, and it's a big one. Our entire model for cybersecurity is completely useless here. It's obsolete, right? We assume a user can tell when they've been compromised, but with this, neural manipulation could be totally imperceptible. You can't just change your password when the password is your own unique brain signature, and you can't just unplug the system when the system is you. Now, as you can probably guess, these kinds of capabilities are, well, they're of massive interest to military and defense agencies all over the world. But this leads to a really profound and honestly a deeply unsettling paradox. In this image, it just illustrates that paradox perfectly. Imagine this. To get a millisecond advantage on the battlefield, an AI might read a soldier's intent to fire and then help shape that action for maximum effect, maybe even before the soldier has a chance to consciously change their mind. And there's the paradox. In the search for perfect control and speed, the human being in the loop might actually lose their own agency.
So that really becomes the core question, doesn't it? When an action is co-created by a human brain and an AI model, who's really the author? I mean, who's responsible? The whole concept of human agency, of being in control, just starts to dissolve.
But hang on. Everything we've talked about so far assumes some kind of physical connection, right? Wires, implants, a cap. What if the interface wasn't just invisible, but what if it didn't physically exist at all? And this is where the story takes a hard turn, leaving the world of engineering behind and diving headfirst into the truly bizarre realm of quantum mechanics. And before you write this all off as just total science fiction, I want you to look at this. This is a real patent, filed by Lockheed Martin back in 2013 for a sensor based on a quantum phenomenon called the Aharonov-Bohm effect. This is not just theory. So what on earth is the Aharonov-Bohm effect? Okay, try to imagine it like this. Picture you're walking down a hallway with closed doors. Even if you never open a single door, the very fact that those rooms exist behind the doors changes how sound echoes in the hallway, right? Well, in a quantum sense, this effect is kind of like that. A particle can be influenced by a magnetic field it never even touches, just by the potential of that field being nearby. It's a real interaction without a direct connection. Wild, right? Okay, so the security implications of this are, well, they're just staggering. A BCI based on this quantum principle could be completely non-invasive. No wires, no surgery, nothing. But even more importantly, the interaction itself would be fundamentally stealthy. I mean, how do you even begin to defend against an influence you can't detect? It creates the perfect, invisible backdoor right into the mind. But you have to be asking, how would you ever read such an impossibly faint, noisy signal? And this is where AI comes back in as the absolute key. The AI's job isn't to amplify the energy of the signal. That's tiny. Its job is to amplify the structure, to find the hidden pattern buried in all that noise and translate those incredibly subtle quantum shifts into a coherent model of what you're thinking. And this really brings us to the ultimate stakes as this technology gets closer and closer to the very substrate of thought itself. We're going to need entirely new kinds of protections. Scholars are already starting to propose what they call neuro-rights, things like cognitive liberty, the right to control your own mental processes, mental privacy, the right to keep your thoughts from being recorded, and psychological continuity, the fundamental right to preserve your own sense of self, to remain you. Which leaves us with one final and, I think, pretty haunting question for the future we're all building. When your brain becomes the ultimate networked device, when it's the final computer, who gets to be the admin?
Today, we are diving deep into the declassified and leaked papers of a man who is working right at the crossroads of neuroscience, warfare, and artificial intelligence. This is a guy who claimed he could not only read your mind, but he could write to it too. Let's get into the absolutely wild world of John Norsine.
Let's just start with Norazine's own words, because, wow. This quote isn't just some catchy line, it's a full-on mission statement. It frames everything he did not as some kind of philosophical thought experiment, but as a direct order for military dominance in a future he believed would be run by what he called synthetic sentient species.
And there it is, the central, almost unbelievable claim that started it all. And you gotta remember, this wasn't some fringe theorist posting on the internet. This was a senior weapons designer at Lockheed Martin, one of the biggest defense contractors on the planet working on classified government programs. The implications of that are just staggering.
So who was this man at the center of it all? Let's take a closer look at John Norsine himself. Okay, so Norsine had some serious credentials. He was a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer, and his thesis at the Naval War College was all about applying neuroscience to counter terrorism. From there, he goes to Lockheed Martin, and that's where his research into neuroweapons really took off. This was high-level, state-sponsored stuff.
This quote just lays it all out there, doesn't it? He's revealing exactly how direct he believed this capability was. We're not talking about subliminal messages and commercials here. He is talking about using extremely low frequency, or ELF, radiation to literally ping your brain and trigger specific thoughts. Basically, to steer your mind down a path you didn't even choose. But how could this possibly work? I mean, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction. To even begin to understand Norsen's claims, we have to dig into his core concept, a process that he called biofusion.
Biofusion is the Rosetta Stone for this entire field. The whole idea is that every single thought, every mental process you have gives off a unique biological and electromagnetic signature. Biofusion is the method of capturing that signature and translating it into pure math, a language that computers can actually understand and process.
All right, let's break this down. First, you treat a thought as a semiotic. It's a term from linguistics, and it just means a sign or a symbol. Each one has its own distinct energy pattern. Second, you use a bunch of different sensors, like EEGs, fMRIs, you name it, to detect these patterns and fuse all that data together. And third, you map all of this information onto something called a Krylov space, which is basically a fancy multi-dimensional graph where your thoughts can be plotted out and analyzed.
And Norsen had this great fishbowl analogy to explain the goal. He said with this technology, you could literally watch a thought form in the deepest, most subconscious parts of the mind, what he called the Marianas Trench of human thought. And then you could track it as it bubbles all the way up to your conscious awareness.
You know, tracking thoughts is one thing. That's already pretty mind-blowing. But Norsen's work didn't stop there. It was all building towards something far more active, and frankly, far more terrifying: the ability to control.
So this is the really crucial part. If you can read a thought's mathematical signature, its brain print, then you can create its inverse. You can then broadcast that inverse signal back into someone's brain. And here's the kicker: the brain gets fooled. It just accepts this external signal as a totally authentic, internally generated thought or memory.
To really grasp how much of a game changer this is, you have to compare it to the classic military doctrine of reflexive control. So the old way was all about feeding your opponent bad information, tricking them into voluntarily making a bad decision. But Norsen's method, it just bypasses free will entirely. The target isn't tricked. Their whole decision-making process is hijacked at a biological level. The choice becomes involuntary, maybe even unconscious.
This diagram here, this shows you that classic model. You figure out what the red adversary wants, and you use your blue forces to manipulate the situation so they make the best reflexive decision for you. It's a big psychological chess game. Norsen, well, he wanted to just reach across the board and move the other guy's pieces for them.
But this incredible technology wasn't just about manipulating human enemies. For John Norsen, that was only a stepping stone. His ultimate ambition was something straight out of a sci-fi novel.
Yeah, you heard that right. He truly believed that by fully decoding the mathematics of consciousness, he could actually replicate it. He wasn't just building a weapon, he was laying the groundwork for a new, artificial form of life that he thought could one day come to dominate Earth.
This slide shows a concept from one of Norsen's colleagues, a guy named Ed Nozawa, called the Peircean Single Warrior Model. And just look at the flow here: environment, data gathering, self-control, action control, and then, finally, weapons. It's a blueprint for a fully autonomous weapons system, a closed-loop management system that observes, decides, and acts with zero human input.
And that is the fundamental question, isn't it? When you automate warfare to this degree, when you create a machine that can think and fight all on its own, what are the consequences? The scary thing is, Norsen wasn't just asking the question. He was actively trying to build the answer.
And he got a plan, a literal plan. At a conference in 2000, in Moscow of all places, he presented what he called the 12 sentient values, which was basically his step-by-step guide for building a sentient machine from scratch.
The first 6 values are the foundation, the building blocks. A machine has to be able to identify objects, to move, to understand direction, and to measure its environment. But what's really crucial here is that he also includes the need for resources and the anxiety that comes with finding them, plus basic emotions. These are the building blocks of awareness.
But then it gets so much more complex. He moves on to biofusion as the actual spark of consciousness itself, the ability to daydream, to be creative, to make tools. And then the final, unbelievable leap, programming a machine with concepts like truth, justice, and morality. And number 12, a fear of death, which he defined as its work stopping. He was literally trying to engineer a soul.
But the story of John Norsen doesn't end with some triumphant new species of machine. It actually ends with a very sudden and very mysterious silence.
So get this. In early 2002, Norcine writes that everything's getting shut down for a new, super-secret program, but then shortly after that, his clearances are totally revoked. He's cut off from the very work that defined his entire life. And then not long after that, at just 53 years old, he dies of a sudden heart attack. His work, his theories, his prototypes, it all just vanished, back into the classified world.
And so we're left with this huge question. Norcine was working on this stuff over 2 decades ago. As all his research just disappeared behind this wall of secrecy, we have to wonder, in today's world of rapidly advancing neuroscience and AI, how much of his speculative science fiction has already become our scientific fact.
So today we're diving into a GitHub repository, but it's probably not what you're expecting. This thing reads less like a software project and more like a science fiction thriller. Its name? Aharonov Bohm Cybersecurity. And it kicks off with a question that's pretty fundamental for the age we live in.
I mean, really? Can they? Can the actual processes of your mind be influenced, jammed, or maybe even read from a distance? It sounds like something straight out of a conspiracy theory, right? But according to the source material for today's explainer, it's a question that government agencies, defense contractors, and now open source researchers are taking very, very seriously.
The repository we're unpacking is this wild intersection of quantum physics, neuroscience, and cybersecurity. And right up front, there's a big disclaimer. This is for academic and defensive purposes only. This isn't a manual for malicious hacking. It's about exploring what the author calls new security. That's NOUS security, the security of the mind itself.
Okay, to really understand the threat and the defense they're proposing, we have to wrap our heads around some seriously mind-bending physics. The entire project is built on one specific quantum mechanical phenomenon that is, well, it's as strange as it is powerful. This is the Aharonov-Bohm effect, or ABE for short, and it's all about a paradox. ABE says a particle can be influenced by a magnetic potential even when it's in a place with zero magnetic field. Think about it like this. Imagine a quantum compass that can feel the pull of a magnet that's completely hidden inside a shielded box. There's no direct force touching it, just an invisible influence on its quantum state. So how does this invisible influence actually work? Well, you can break it down. You take a particle's path and you split it, kind of like a stream flowing around an island. One of those paths goes through a region that has this vector potential. You can think of that as the invisible blueprint for a magnetic field, but no actual field is there. Then, when the two paths merge back together, there's a measurable difference, a phase shift. And that shift is the signature, the proof of that invisible potential. It's like a whisper from a ghost in the machine.
You've probably heard of spooky action at a distance when people talk about quantum entanglement. Well, ABE is another kind of spooky action, but with one crucial difference. Entanglement is probabilistic. It's all about chance. ABE, on the other hand, is deterministic, and you can tune it. And that's what makes it potentially exploitable. It could be a tool for sending secret signals or creating very targeted interference.
So, how does this physics turn into an actual threat? This table from the repository lays it out pretty clearly. An attacker could use ABE for phase manipulation, which could mess with quantum computers or even entrain your brainwaves. They could inject decoherence, basically flooding a sensitive system with noise to either crash it or to impair a person's ability to think. Or, and this is where it gets really weird, they could create covert channels to leak information, or even, as the repository speculates, for mind-to-mind signaling.
Now, if all of this still sounds like pure theory, hang on, because this is where the repository takes us down a very deep and surprisingly well-documented rabbit hole. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a story with a real history that involves spies, global superpowers, and corporate patents.
The story seems to kick off back in the 1980s when the Soviet military was researching remote biological effects using AB generators. After the Cold War, the repository says some of those scientists were debriefed by the CIA and then hired by defense contractors like Lockheed Martin. From there, a Lockheed researcher apparently developed concepts like biofusion and thought injection. This all seems to culminate in 2013 when Lockheed Martin got a patent for an AB sensor, which the repository then connects directly to the infamous Havana Syndrome incident a few years later. And this isn't some claim from an obscure online forum. This is a direct quote from page 10 of a United States patent granted to one of the biggest defense contractors on the planet. It states their AB sensor could be so sensitive that, quote, a person's mind may be read without the person realizing it. Just let that sink in for a minute.
And what's really fascinating is the context. The patent lists all these plausible, almost boring applications, things like navigation, testing materials, detecting shielded sources, and then slipped right in there alongside them is this bombshell: reading nerve signals from a human brain. The contrast just makes that claim stand out even more.
So, if the threat is real, or at least being actively researched, what's the defense? This is where the GitHub project pivots. It goes from being a history lesson to a practical, open-source guide for a countermeasure you can actually build yourself.
The strategy is actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. If an attacker is trying to lock onto your brain's rhythms with a steady, coherent signal, you fight back with chaos. You generate randomized, accelerating vector potentials to break their lock. The repository uses the perfect analogy. It's like spread spectrum jamming, but for your mind.
And the repository gives instructions for 2 different DIY builds to do this. The first one uses a high-power infrared LED modulating light with random patterns to create what it calls phase noise. The second system uses a coil to generate a rotating, accelerating magnetic field designed to jam any attempt to lock onto a coherent signal in the area.
When you look at the parts list, you realize this isn't some unobtainable classified technology. We're talking about an Arduino board, a non-metal embroidery hoop, speaker wire, and some really basic electronic components. This is technology that's accessible to any hobbyist, which is the whole point of making it an open-source project.
And the build process seems just as straightforward. You wind a coil, you wire up a simple circuit, you upload the code they provide to the Arduino, and you have a device that's designed to shield an object, or a person, from these theoretical remote influencing waves. It's pretty much the democratization of defense.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What are the bigger implications here? This GitHub repository isn't just a cool DIY project, it's a window into a potential future where the human mind itself could become a contested space.
And what's really crucial is that the repository notes that this threat isn't just limited to biology. The same principles of phase manipulation could be used to attack our digital infrastructure. These ABO-style attacks could introduce jitter into computer system clocks, disrupt wireless signals, or cause faults in encryption engines. That's a potential threat to everything from your laptop to the entire Internet of Things.
But then there's this incredible twist. The repository explores a dual use for this tech. The same randomized field used as a defensive countermeasure might have a therapeutic benefit. It theorizes that for individuals with autism who experience sensory overload, this structured randomness could act like white noise for the senses, helping to calm and filter an overwhelming environment.
And for anyone worried about, strapping a magnetic coil to their head, the project provides some important context. The estimated field strength of the DIY device is about 56 microteslas. That's roughly the same as the Earth's natural magnetic field that we all live in every single day. So it's considered a safe level for continuous use.
So in the end, we're left with a pretty profound question. Is this GitHub repository a peek into the dawn of neurowarfare, a legitimate threat we need to start defending against? Or is it an elaborate open-source blueprint for paranoia, connecting disparate dots into a conspiracy? The code is there, the patents are real, and the physics is on the books. The rest? Well, the rest is for you to decide.